Welcome back to the SportsMax Zone. What do big names such as Adolphus Powell, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce and Elaine Walker have in common? Well, they all achieved fame and fortune at the MVP track club before leaving in a huff after falling out with head coach Stephen Francis. Earlier today, shockwaves were sent through the international track and field community as news broke that the fastest woman alive, Elaine Thompson-Herah, is to be the latest high-profile departure. Joining us to discuss this developing story, SportsMax track and field expert Leighton Levy. Leighton, what can you tell us about this development? A huge one. There were murmurs earlier on this week about it, but it seems to be gaining traction.
Well, before going to that, Lance, I just want to say condolences to the family of Adolphus Peters. I remember back he used to run with Johan Blake, Nicola Schmid, and of course, Riker Hilton on that amazing 4x1 team for St. Diego. Died today in a freak accident in North Carolina. I want to say condolences to his family and friends. He was well loved, well liked, and well respected. Okay, going back to Elaine Thompson-Herah situation. This has been on the rumor mill for about 2 months now. Prior to the Olympics, we started to hear rumblings that this was going to be the end of the relationship between the athlete and, of course, the coach. And, of course, just about 3 weeks ago, I heard from a very reliable source, that you can call it an impeccable source, that definitely she's leaving. And so, of course, we were tracking the story, couldn't get anything to confirm. But then today, the news broke that she had indicated to the club via letter that she was going to be departing the club. And, of course, Stephen Francis would no longer be her coach. There's a sidebar to that also that suggests that she's also indicated to Nike that she's going to come to an end with her relationship. We haven't got much else on that except to say that we're hearing about a mega deal with Puma, but there's not much to say about that.
Your story in the sportsmax.tv website today, Leighton, suggested that Bruce James, who is the MVP president, is saying there are ongoing negotiations at the moment with the athlete and her future with the club, suggesting that he isn't yet ready to announce her departure from the MVP track club.
Yeah, we heard that. And I think it's just diplomatic speak, because based on multiple sources that I spoke with this morning, she is out. As far as I know, she will be coached going forward by her husband, Leighton Herah, who is part of the St. Diego High School track program currently. So that's what we're hearing. And it's I did hear from an insider this morning that yes, she did indicate to the club that she is leaving. So it's I think bit by bit the details are beginning to emerge about the situation, which we were told has been contentious for months. In fact, we were told that the coaching of Stephen Francis was done almost third party between himself and, of course, Elaine Thompson, even during the Olympic Games. So we hear it's been contentious for a long time, and of course, this is where it seems to be headed.
Leighton, is this a surprise, this issue where MVP Track Club is concerned? Because we know Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, she left, then there was Adolphus Powell. So any new news here?
Oh, look, what we have seen over the years, because nobody, I think, really knows the true details of what is happening here or what happened prior, because we saw in 2019 Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who had left in 2016 during the Olympics, left again in 2020 April last year. Before that, it was Sharon Simpson. Before that, it was Michael Frater. Before that, it was Adolphus Powell and Elaine Walker. We don't know, because we didn't have much detail as to why these athletes left. But what Stephen Francis in an interview today says or suggested that there are certain athletes, some of these athletes, when they get to a point of success, they start to listen to the voices around them as opposed to, determining for themselves what's best for them. But, and he might very well be correct here. The thing is, when so many athletes have left at the peak of their careers, you have to ask the questions why. I mean, we won't know unless somebody speaks definitively on it, because you can only speculate from here on. But it's the optics of it is not good at all.
Yeah, and Stephen Francis would definitely feel a bit hard done, because it's not the first time that this has been done to him. Leighton, with regards to the mega Puma deal, do you get the sense that after the Olympics, a lot of people were pushing the fact that Nike were very unfair in the way that they celebrated Elaine. This was trending, many people saying that, you know, they celebrated Sha'Carri. They created an entire ad and whatnot, and then she came last. Do you feel like this had a part to play in, or if this mega deal with Puma comes off?
Based on what we're hearing, it could be, if there's any validity to the claim that she's about to sign a mega deal with Puma, it might have something to do with it. Because if you remember, back then, I think it was shortly after that meet in Oregon on August 21st, that her Instagram profile, the Nike association, was temporarily removed. Of course, you remember that, you know, Nike did a whole big thing with NBC with the ad with Sha'Carri Richardson. And of course, in the very race, you had your Olympic champion with your new Olympic record and somebody who ran 10:54, the fastest time for any woman alive today. And all the focus seemed to have gone to Sha'Carri Richardson. You know, so that might have something to do with it if the claims are to be believed. And of course, the fact that I think, you know, based on what we are hearing, that, you know, she's being paid by Nike as opposed to what Sha'Carri Richardson is being paid, somebody who is unproven at the international level compared to someone who has proven themselves as a double Olympic champion, Olympic record holder, fastest woman in history. You know, there is some credence there. We just don't know exactly what it means in terms of whether or not she's deciding to leave Nike or not.
Leighton, if we should walk on the journalistic tiles that you have laid so far in your interview on this show about this story, who then should we credit for what we saw from Mrs. Thompson-Herah at the recent Tokyo Olympics?
Stephen Francis. I mean, he is her coach, and regardless of how the information was communicated to her, he is the source of that information. So, you know, it does nothing to take away from the impact and the influence he has had on what has been an extraordinary season for Elaine Thompson-Herah. 10:54, 10:61, 10:64, 10:65. The first woman to run under 10:7 4 times. The first woman to ever defend the 100 and 200 meter titles at the same Olympic Games. You know, winning the Diamond League title. It's been an unmatched season by any woman in history. I mean, barring the 10:49 run by Flojo back in 1988, that is under a cloud in my mind, based on the win readings, the so-called win readings of that race. You know, this has been the best season ever by a female sprinter. So, you know, notwithstanding what has happened or what has unfolded over the last 6 months, based on what we're hearing, Stephen Francis still gets credit for the incredible success that she has had.
Part of the reason I asked as well, my friend, and I was going along the lines of what you said you had picked up along the grapevine. The fact is that there has also been word making the rounds in recent weeks that really and truly her husband was the one who was guiding her preparation and her training through the Olympics. Now, if that is worth anything at all, and with the information that you are aware of, you are still resolute in your determination that Stephen Francis is the man who has guided her through this unparalleled, unprecedented campaign.
Absolutely. Regardless of, look, I don't know Darren Herah's credentials as a coach, right? What I do know is that it doesn't match up in any way, shape, or form to the credentials of Stephen Francis. We've seen his work over the last 2 decades as being unparalleled in terms of global coaching in many respects. Many people regard him as the best track and field coach in the world. The thing is that regardless of whoever communicated the information, the fact is that it still came from Stephen Francis. He is the man who declared before the national championships in June that Elaine Thompson was in the best shape of her life. And nobody disputes whether or not he was in charge during that period of time. The information might have been communicated through her husband, but the fact is that it was his work, it was his philosophy, it was his ideas and training acumen that got her to this point. So in my mind, certainly there is no doubt.
Absolutely. Very happy that you managed to shut the door on a narrative that was developing, because we had to put that to you for you to speak to what some people have been fueling, the line that really and truly Stephen shouldn't be credited for what Elaine achieved. On the other matter concerning Stephen Francis himself, people who don't have the proximity to the MVP camp and the athletes that you do in your privileged position as a top flight journalist would ask, well, if we are to go by the athletes who've left him in the upper trajectory of their career, it's not as if people who have been has-beens have walked out in frustration. Top athletes at the top of their game with a lot to give have left him. They're wondering, Leighton, what is it about this esteemed gentleman, this genius of a coach, and in my mind he was that even before the recent Olympics. What is it about this genius of a coach that causes him and his charges to fall out in the way that he has with so many in the past? What would you say?
Wow, that's a difficult one to navigate, George, because the thing about it, there are so many theories out there about why this thing happens. One theory is that for all his brilliance as a track and field coach, Stephen Francis's man management is not the best. We've seen it, we've heard it from athletes. In fact, a number of athletes who have left the club speak about the fact that he, is not his best gifts. He doesn't do a very good job of managing skills. Because look, throughout the course of history, there have been a number of rivals existing within the same camp. Shelly and Fraser-Pryce and Elaine Thompson. There was Carl Lewis and Joe DeLoach, and of course Mark Burrell. There was Jeremy Warner and of course Michael Johnson. There's so many cases. What was different, I think, in many of those cases is the ability of those coaches to manage the respective egos, to manage the athletes, and allow each athlete to feel comfortable within the environment in which they're training. I get the sense, based on some conversations, and this is just opinion of people who I've spoken with, is that maybe he feels that a relationship that is more of a rivalry rather than friendship between his best athletes helps to drive each of them to their very best. What we've seen, however, in recent times is that doesn't necessarily seem to work. He found success earlier on. If you look at it individually, Asafa Paul was the premier athlete in his camp. There was nobody challenging Asafa. But then Sharon Simpson came along, but Shelly and Fraser-Pryce came along and then supplanted her. And then Shelly, to a degree, early in Elaine Thompson's career, was supplanted. She was supplanted by Elaine Thompson-Herah. That rivalry eventually, became contentious based on what we are hearing. And of course, we've seen where it has yielded the results, where Shelly has run under Stephen Francis, 10:71, and of course Elaine Thompson, 10:70 each, but both sharing the national record, which means that there is some validity to his idea, if this is what it actually is, that the rivalry drives each athlete to their pushing the envelope to their very best. However, what eventually might lead to is these kind of contentious relationships that eventually causes a breakdown within the camp itself and causes these rivalries that extend to the other athletes in the camp and creates a very, an environment that doesn't have the harmony that it should have. So we're only, and again, all of this is assumption because you really don't know unless somebody says something specifically, definitively.
Yeah.
You can only go off of what reported sources are saying.
Leighton, hold it right there. Stay with us. We're gonna pick up on this conversation after the break. This, folks, is the SportsMax Zone. Back with us on the SportsMax Zone, we're talking about Elaine Thompson-Herah and that bombshell that dropped today that she has served notice on the MVP track club that she is leaving. She's going to engage new management because she feels that it is what is best for her career at this time. Of course, it is with MVP that Elaine Thompson shot to prominence and that Elaine Thompson-Herah has found superstardom under the MVP banner, but the athlete believes that her best interests are best served elsewhere. We have the ace journalist online, Leighton Levy, talking to us about this issue. Just two more quick things from me, Leighton. On the point of Stephen Francis's perceived man management, there's so much that we don't know, and what we know gives me comfort in saying that, as I've said, the man is a genius. To me, his methods have proven themselves time and again as being effective and the best. And nobody quite delivers an athlete to major championships like Stephen Francis does across any country that we can examine in track and field. So I would say that within the context of MVP, it's not a one-man shop. It's not a one-man band. There are other people there with varying skills, and there are people there who are esteemed professionals in their own right. And when it comes to the business of managing a track and field athlete, is it then fair, Leighton, to question the input, perhaps even the quality of support from the other leading lights within the MVP setup for acting almost as a cushion against Stephen and the way he directs the performance side of his athletes, and call into question the contribution of those who would have come in at another level of the whole training to ensure that athletes feel valued and feel that they're the most important. In other words, it's a combination thing. Stephen does one part, somebody else takes care of another part, and maybe MVP may want to look into the arrangement to say, well, are we supporting him enough? Are we insulating him from some of the worst feelings of the athletes, especially as they get more successful?
Now, you have to believe that has to be the case, George, because when you have the caliber of athletes who have left MVP over the years, you have to believe that not all of them have people whispering in their ears and telling them that they've now arrived, so they no longer need Stephen Francis. Some of them clearly have had issues with, the relationship, the whole flow of how things function within that club. So yes, I mean, looking back at it, maybe there needs to be a greater level of intervention on the part of the other managers within the club to ensure that whatever is brought by Stephen Francis, because he is who he is, there is some balance to it in terms of those who will help to put things in proper context for the athletes and say, listen, because look, coaches are not there to be your friends. It's a business, huh? They're there, the coach is there to ensure that he brings out the best out of you. The other managers, I believe, are there to ensure that the athletes have a relatively stable peace of mind, understanding that business and understanding what is required from them, as well as the coach. I think if that becomes a reality, I think we'll see a lot more harmony within the club, because what it is right now is that, as I mentioned before, the optics of it is not great. You look at Shelly and Fraser-Pryce, who became the GOAT in 2019 after winning her 4th world title in Doha, and then she leaves virtually immediately afterwards. And then now Elaine Thompson, after the season of seasons for any female athlete, leaves immediately after the Olympics. And prior to that, there was, of course, we mentioned before, the Sharon Simpsons, the Safa Powells. Whatever those reasons are, it cannot be, I do not believe it to be the same for all of those athletes. So it's clearly something needs to be addressed within the structure of the club that allows them to be able to manage both sides of that equation to ensure that there's some equity, or the athletes feel that there's some equity in how things are managed at the club.
Yeah, last thing from me, Leighton. I hear people talking about this contract issue, and they make it seem as if you just write a letter and cancel a contract. You and I know that that's not how it goes. Do you have a sense of the tenure of the contract with herself and Nike, and if it is that she's breaking that contract early, if there will be a penalty to pay, a financial penalty? One would suspect that the exit clause would be clearly stipulated and it would cost her to break a contract early. Or is it that she's using the opportunity of the contract running its course to serve notice that, yeah, she will be looking for a new deal and not necessarily with the sponsor Nike?
I think it's more the latter, George, allowing the contract to run its course. I have not been able to garner any information that suggests that the contract between herself and Nike has expired, which means that she probably will have to ride it out until, the natural expiration date comes, of which we are not sure, because if you remember, Elaine Thompson was the queen of the world in 2016, but for the next 5 years before this year, she had not won anything. So whatever incremental, elements were in her contract would have not come into play, so she wouldn't have been earning as much money as possible. However, this thing is that contract would still have to run its term before she could actually think about leaving or even breaking it. I have not been able to get any information. I tried to get some information. Obviously, that information is going to remain confidential because of the nature of the business. But, I would suspect that she'd probably just run the contract out before signing any new contract, if there is a new contract on the table from any other sponsor.
Yeah. Leighton, you know what? You've already established that there's a lot of information here on this story that we don't have. Some of the information that I can retrieve would be maybe Stephen Francis's pronouncements in the past. And I remember when Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce was leaving the MVP club in the first instance, he said publicly that some of these athletes are less willing to listen now that they've become stars than earlier in their careers when they, were just developing their careers. So that in itself told me what Stephen Francis felt at that time. We all know he's a straight talking individual. Does that, narrow some gaps for you in this story maybe?
Not really, because he said the same thing again today, where he said pretty much verbatim what he said prior to when Shelly left in 2016. And he said it before when Sharon Simpson left the club as well. So I think this is probably his diplomatic speak, not wanting to reveal too much about the circumstances under which his athletes have left some of them at the peak of their careers. I think, though, that, maybe it's time that he takes a step back and look at what has gone wrong or what has not gone as right as he would have hoped. Why? Because, look, are you trying to tell me that all of these athletes, every single one of them, suddenly became too big for their britches, so to speak, and figured out they could go out on their own and do it? I don't think so. I mean, every individual is different and their circumstances are different. So I don't believe that every single one of these athletes, remember, we're not talking about fly-by-night athletes, we're talking about elite athletes. Asafa Paul, world record holder, Sharon Simpson, Olympic champion, Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, Olympic champion, Elaine Thompson, Emilian Walker, world champion, Olympic champion, Olympic records. You're looking at all of these people were not leaving for the same reason. So, the common denominator there is Stephen Francis. Yeah. So maybe it's time for some introspection. Yeah. They say you might be too old to change, but from a business perspective, it doesn't seem to make much sense to me when you keep losing your best assets when they're in their prime. Yeah,
we are pretty much running out of time now, so we've got to leave it here. But I just have one more comment here, because on the streets, people tend to feel, I know there was a Safa Powell and Tajay Gale and so on, but there's been this constant feeling throughout the track and field circles that Stephen Francis is more likely to have success with women than men because of his caustic coaching style. And because of how women are, they may be a little bit more accepting of his aggression, you may call it, than men are. Does that make sense to you?
Well, the data suggests that he has more success with women than men, but that's hard to gauge, Lance. It really is, because when you look at what he did with Nesta Carlton, Asafa Paul, and Michael Frater, he hasn't had that much success since, but maybe because the talent wasn't there. I mean, in fact, if you remember, in just this past season as well, Julian Fort has left and gone to join the elite performance as well. So maybe there is some credence to the fact that he does better with female athletes as opposed to Glenn Mills, perhaps, who does better with the guys. Maybe there's some element of truth to it, but I'm not quite sure if the data suggests that it actually is valid.
All right, Leighton, great talking to you here. We'll be continuing to follow this story because this is a huge one, not only from a Caribbean perspective, but I think globally the track and field world will be watching this one very closely and see where the story takes up from here. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Leighton.
Yeah, man. Take it easy, guys.
Yeah, Mariah, George, a huge one, this story. And we're really anxious to see how the story unfolds because the Puma deal appears to be something pending. And as Leighton is suggesting, could be part of this story. But I'm getting a sense from Leighton that it may not be the only thing.
Yeah, and what I do know is the fans that love Elaine and of course want to see her break Flojo's record would be a bit concerned because they want to ensure that, the momentum doesn't break. But I trust that she knows what she's doing and we're wishing her the best.
Yeah. Coming up, President of the West Indies Players Association, Wavell Hines, will join us to discuss the ongoing efforts made by his organization to educate the region's players about corruption.